Should you be a delivery driver in 2024? Whether you want to be an Uber Eats driver, a DoorDash driver, a Grubhub driver, the list goes on and on. Welcome back to Buck Living, a channel all about making money. I gotta be honest right away, I did a lot of research for this video, and there's a lot of different things I am gonna get into. Specifically, I'm gonna talk about 10 different points you really have to consider when it comes to should you be a delivery driver in 2024, or shouldn't you be a delivery driver in 2024? Number one, what type of delivery driving? I know this sounds like a weird place to start, but I do want to start here. What I'm talking about is in 2024, when I say I want to be a delivery driver, most people think Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, Postmates, etc., etc. However, doing research, there are different places where, let's say, being a pizza delivery person or delivering Chinese food, for example, can actually pay more money. And this is something to consider. In addition, depending on the requirements, which is something I am going to talk about in a little bit, this is a factor as well. As you can imagine, signing up for, let's say, Uber Eats is going to be a little bit of a different process than, let's say, going down to your local Domino's, for example, and signing up. In some cases, you might qualify for Uber Eats, but maybe Domino's is all set when it comes to hoping that you get a job there. Or vice versa. It could be that Domino's is like, hey, you know what? We'd love to hire you. You fit everything that we want. But Uber Eats, for whatever reason, maybe you do not fit those requirements. This is something to keep in mind. And I want to start off here because I still remember this very vividly. This is years ago. One of my friends in college was delivering pizzas. That's what he did. And he was making, when I'd ask him, like, hey, how much do you make on like a Friday night? That's typically when he would deliver. And granted, remember, this is a college town. You know, when you think of the apartment complexes, a lot of his deliveries were very close together. It's not like a typical city where he was driving miles upon miles. And he made, on average, 25 to 30 an hour. And when I pressed him harder, being like, okay, well, would you say it's closer to 25 or closer to 30? He'd say, to be honest, probably closer to 30 an hour. And the reason why is, one, it's not like it was through the app where you tip in the beginning. You tip when you actually get the food, right? And I think there is, and I've talked about this before in other videos on this channel, some unique social pressure in things like bartending and things like, I don't know, of course, when you get food at a restaurant, that you tip at the end when the person's there in front of you. Delivery driving is really the only thing that you tip in the beginning, but of course, this was years ago, right? So there wasn't like an app or whatever. People called it in. He went to their house. In addition, he was a very social person. So he would get there, it'd be a huge party, be like, hey, what's up, guys? Got your pizzas. And he said his average tip was between $5 and $10. If he did, 3 deliveries in an hour, which was very easy to do on a college campus, he'd make about $30 an hour sometimes in tips on top of his actual hourly rate. So I just want to say this as a quick side note that it can be very interesting to do some research in your area. I have found doing research, it does depend area to area. In some places, you're way better off just sticking with Uber Eats and DoorDash, Postmates, Grubhub, just stick with those. In other places, though, you are actually better off, let's say, talking to a mom and pop pizza stop or a joint near your place, Chinese food restaurant, basically look into more of a local kind of chain or something local in your area, because those places might actually pay more. Number two, the requirements. This is very interesting when it comes to being a delivery driver. And I will say as a quick side note, I just posted a video about should you be an Uber driver and a Lyft driver in 2024. And there will be some parallels from that video to this video in case you already watched that video. The requirements, though, if let's say you look at rideshare driving versus delivery driving, are a bit interesting. Mainly for one reason, that is the barrier to entry for being a rideshare driver is pretty low, in my opinion, with the fact that you don't need to get a certification. You just need a driver's license. You can rent a car if you don't have one. But when it comes to delivery driving, it's even lower than that. For example, to be an Uber driver, you need to be 21 years or older. To be a Lyft driver, typically in most areas, you need to be 25 years or older. Not the case with being a delivery driver. With being a delivery driver, you need to be typically 18 or 19 years or older. So if let's say you're in college, which I think, a lot of people looking at the gig economy, I know a lot of it is college students. If you're in college, the barrier to entry is a lot lower, which makes delivery driving a lot more feasible of an option. In addition, I will say, and this is very important, the requirements do vary city to city and state to state. It is kind of annoying that with both, rideshare driving, delivery driving, a lot of things in the gig economy, you'd be surprised how much your location has a huge impact on the ability or lack of ability for you to be able to work. For example, in even just the same state, in one city, your car could qualify. In a city 2 hours away, it could not qualify. So this is something, unfortunately, you do have to do research on. I have done videos about the different requirements, but as you can imagine, I don't know how many, obviously 50 states in America, but I don't know how many cities there are in America. Thousands upon thousands, right? So this does vary area to area, but to use an example when it comes to the requirements, if let's say you have a two-door vehicle, you cannot drive for Uber and Lyft. However, if you have a two-door vehicle, you can be a delivery driver. In addition, if let's say you want to have someone in the car with you, you can do that with delivery driving. You cannot do that with rideshare driving. Another thing I want to talk about when it comes to the requirements, and this is a big thing to consider if, like, say, you do want to be a delivery driver or not, is it is a bit easier to start and then work your way up. Now, I have mentioned this in other videos. I honestly don't know how feasible it is if you want to, especially live off it. But in terms of modes of transportation, you can start off on foot. I feel like the only place I can think of is maybe New York. I mean, maybe Boston. I don't know. New York's the only place I can genuinely think of. Maybe a college campus. Maybe. But you can start off on foot. And purely on foot, no vehicle whatsoever. Then you can work your way up and be on a bicycle. I do know, though, in some cities, there has been some pushback where a lot of people are getting annoyed with a lot of people riding their bikes. I've seen some YouTube videos of people getting mad about this, but I think it's a good idea. Let's say you want to get exercise and you want to be delivering. I will talk about the best times to deliver as well. You're like, hey, you ride to the restaurant, pick it up. Of course, make sure you have a good container or ability to hold the food because you don't want it to be damaged. You don't want it to get too cold, etc., etc. And bring it from point A to point B. You can do that on a bike and then even a motorized scooter. And then, of course, eventually a vehicle. So I will say when it comes to being a delivery driver, if actually you're considering, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? I will say that joining and starting in terms of the requirements, whether it's your age, I think you don't even need a driver's license. I believe you do need, I think, a government issued ID. Again, this does vary city to city and state to state. So these are all different things you do have to consider. But overall, when it comes to the requirements, it's such a low barrier to entry that you can join, sign up, and remember, when it comes to, say, Uber Eats, for example, there's not a quota. You could, say, sign up, do 5 deliveries, and be like, all right, I'm going to wait a little bit, and then maybe do one in a month. You can easily do that. There's not a quota, so when it comes to the requirements overall and you signing up, the barrier to entry is very low. Number 3, the necessary issue. This is one that I'm very worried about when it comes to 2024. Now, some of these are more general things about being a delivery driver, like the requirements. Other ones are more time specific or recent or year specific. And this is one, and that is you have 2 different things going on that really affect a lot of delivery drivers. You have too many drivers and then inflation. And these are kind of like a double whammy. Now, when it comes to too many drivers being on the road, this is something I talked about in that video about being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. Because of the way the economy is going, a lot of people are getting secondary jobs. And if you think about it, what better secondary job to have when it comes to you trying to fit in another job with your current job than being, say, a rideshare driver or a delivery driver? And one issue is the fact that if you think about it, the more drivers that are on the road, whether you're doing Uber and Lyft or Uber Eats, DoorDash, etc., there's only a finite amount of rides you can do. Whether you're, bringing people to and from their destination or bringing food to and from its destination, right? There's only a finite amount. And if you think about it, with more people signing up than ever before into the gig economy, and with there being, again, only a finite amount of rides you can really do, this can cause some issues. And when it comes to delivery driving, it's the same thing as rideshare driving. There's more and more people sign up as a delivery driver. That means it could get a lot more cutthroat. It could be the fact that you turn on the app, and remember, it is truly flexible with an app like Uber Eats, for example, or DoorDash. You turn it on whenever you want, and you're like, all right, I'm going to turn it on and work this next hour. But you could easily get maybe no deliveries, or you get only one, maybe two. Like, it could be that kind of issue. And I have it people, and again, I know I keep jumping back and forth between ride sharing and delivery driving, but it's important to look at both because I do get a lot of comments, and I've interviewed more rideshare drivers than delivery drivers. And it makes sense because if you think about it, I typically don't talk to my delivery driver when they bring me Uber Eats. I also don't order Uber Eats that much, but in Uber or Lyft, I take them all the time. And a lot of drivers have commented on the show saying, hey, Mark, you're actually kind of wrong about there being too many drivers on the road per se. It's already happened. I've already gone out, and it's harder and harder for me to get those rides, and it's very unfortunate. And it's the same thing with delivery driving. It's getting harder and harder because a lot more people are signing up. Where let's say there's a bajillion Uber Eats drivers on the road, that means the amount of rides that you can get or deliveries is a lot smaller because they have to be distributed out in some way. So that's the first thing that causes issue of it might not being worth it at all in 2024. The second thing, and this I say is a more pressing thing, that's kind of combined with the inflation aspect, is what I like to call the necessary issue. And that's what I really want to talk about on this point. That's very unique to delivery driving. That is this. For most people, when you ask them, for most people, is Uber and Lyft necessary? Most people would say yes. Is Uber Eats necessary? Most people would say no. Right? If you think about it. Now, yes, there are certain situations. Take like Instacart, for example, or Uber Shop and Pay. I think it's called Shop and Pay, where it's kind of like similar to Instacart. It's kind of like the rival of Instacart. I'm not going to be talking a lot about Instacart on this video, but, you know, in case you don't know, Instacart is where someone gives you like a grocery list. You go to the store, you buy all the stuff for them, you bring it to their house. Now, I will say, you could argue there is some more necessariness, if that's the right word. I don't think that's a word. When it comes to Instacart, let's say you're elderly or disabled, I have heard of people being like, hey, I can't leave my house. I know during COVID, for example, that was a really big example. Let's say you had COVID, someone brings the groceries to your front door. If, let's say, you're handicapped, right? There are some situations, I think, where it is more necessary. And I guess you could argue that with Uber Eats as well. But I'd say for most people, 90% of orders, they're like, look, I'm tired, or let's say, I've had a long day. I just don't feel like cooking. You know, I mentioned this before. One of my favorite companies when it comes to the gig economy is Skip the Dishes, which is an app in Canada. Great name, because that pretty much is self-explanatory, right? You don't feel like cooking and having to wash all those dishes and everything. Boom, you skip the dishes, you order. When it comes to deliveries, a lot of people know you hit a burrito for $10 on the app. Next thing you know, you're spending $23 because of all these fees and everything. And the fee breakdown does make it a lot more alarming to people being like, wow, all these fees and taxes, of course I'm going to tip. I'm buying a $10 burrito, which typically already costs $8, but the restaurants bump up their prices and everything. And now it's $23 for this burrito. It's already not necessary. And it's extremely overpriced. I'm not going to order it. And one thing I'm worried about in 2024, as inflation gets worse, and as more people are, like I said, getting secondary jobs, I can see a lot more people being like, you know what? I'm not going to order delivery anymore. And I've seen this a lot. I did a video, I think it was like 2 months ago, about a viral post on Reddit, how a lot of people are actually doing the math out. One person did the math out, that their average order that they typically got is now 40% more expensive now for the same exact thing, same exact order, same exact size and everything than it was a year or 2 years previously, right? Things have gone up. And as a result, I can see a lot more people saying, you know what? I'm done ordering Uber Eats. Not anymore, right? And if you think about it, with more and more drivers being on the road, and in my opinion, less and less people ordering Uber Eats as a result of things getting more expensive and the economy and the fact that it's not really necessary, I can see it being a huge issue. And that's a big, I'd say if anything on this entire video, probably this, I don't know if it's scary, but the most alarming thing that I am really worried about, right? Because like I said, you don't really have to get Uber Eats. For a lot of people, they're like, you know what? I can cook. I can stop at the grocery store on the way back from work. I don't need Uber Eats, but it's convenient and it's nice, right? But it's not necessary. I think for Uber and Lyft is a little different because let's be honest, if you're drinking or let's say you have to get to and from work or whatever, you need Uber and Lyft. And that's why if you look at rides, I see a lot of people are still going to be ordering Ubers and Lyfts regardless of the way the economy is going and inflation, being honest. When it comes to Uber Eats, the fact that it's not necessary, and again, it's even like more of a double whammy on that point that Uber Eats is not that necessary, and the price of everything going up, and then combine that with more and more drivers being on the road, it's a whole perfect storm of all these things happening at once that makes me really worried about what delivery driving could be like in the future, and if there's basically way less deliveries than ever before, and way more people try to get those deliveries, it might not be worth it at all in terms of the hourly rate. But there is one potential saving grace, and that is number 4, the minimum hourly guarantee. I talked about this in my Uber and Lyft video for 2024. This could be massive. I'd be very curious, though, to see if this could be a countrywide thing compared to Uber and Lyft, where, like I said, I did do some research, and it's tough to say based off the analytics right exactly now, because no one's done an exact conclusive study, but based off different meta-analyses, there are typically more rideshare drivers than delivery drivers on the road. So I will say that. And this is what's very unique about this point, and that is New York just had a huge thing with Uber and Lyft and what's going on in the gig economy when it comes to the wages and everything, that long story short, delivery drivers now get a minimum hourly guarantee. There is a couple different ways to factor it in, but I have talked about this in a bunch of other videos, and I have had people comment saying, hey Mark, it's great now. The way it works is now basically you get a minimum hourly guarantee. I think it's either $19 or $29, depending if they do normal hours versus active hours. There's a whole thing behind the scenes. Again, I've done videos about this. And now you get a minimum hourly guarantee. So let's say if you go out and you get one delivery and you make $10, who cares? They have to bump you up and you're still gonna get a minimum hourly guarantee. So let's say there's too many Uber Eats drivers on the road, like I said before. Let's say not enough people are ordering Uber Eats. Who cares? You're still getting that minimum hourly guarantee. And the way Uber Eats and DoorDash have kind of adjusted for this is now charging people on average $2 for a $30 order. Not that bad. In addition, the tipping option is now not happening in the beginning, but happening at the end. I actually think that's a good idea because I have talked to a lot of drivers and I've gotten some comments of delivery drivers saying, hey Mark, this is actually a good thing. Like, yeah, I'm getting less tips. Got to be honest, I'm getting less tips. But at the end of the day, I have more money in my pocket. And if you think about it, yes, you want to get tips. You do. But would you rather get less tips and have more money or get more tips and have less money, right? I think for everybody, it's all about the almighty dollar. It's all about how much money is going to be in your pocket at the end of the day. And in addition, I've said this before in other videos, it is interesting, definitely a subject for a whole other video, and I have talked about this in other videos when it comes to tipping culture and everything, that it is interesting that delivery driving is truly the only thing, and I've thought a lot about this, I can't think of any other example, let me know though, is the only service that you tip before that service happens, right? For every other service, especially here in America, right, because I know this is pretty much an America-only thing, you tip at the end to represent that service that you got. If you got bad service, you might tip less. If you got amazing service, you might tip more. With delivery driving, you have no idea. And there's been times, I'll be honest, where I have ordered delivery and it came to my house and it was perfect, great delivery driver. And I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I gave him a good tip. And I've always been a big tipper, especially with me being a former rideshare driver and not delivery driver, but rideshare driver and a bartender. But there's been other times where I gave him a big tip and a very good tip, and my food got there and they screwed up the order or it spilled, or basically they were just not the best delivery driver, right? So I do think this is good. And here in California, like say Prop 22 happened that kept like say Uber and Lyft drivers as independent contractors, and now they get a minimum hourly guarantee. Now, California and New York, of course, are not the entire country, but I do want to mention this, that it could be possible that there's a ripple effect that could make it that you could get a minimum hourly guarantee for being a delivery driver. This could be the one saving grace, in my opinion, that could be huge. Because I'm going to be honest, let's say if you live in a rural part of Ohio, for example, already getting Ubers and Lyfts in different parts of Ohio, way less frequent. But being an Uber Eats driver, in my opinion, even way less frequent than that to make decent money. This is why I suggest all the way back to point one. If you, let's say, live in a very rural town, you're probably going to make more money, like say doing your local pizza spot and doing deliveries for them than doing, like say, Uber Eats. Again, it is tough to say. It depends upon your location, but I just want to say this as a quick side note, right? But if you think about it, if like say you live in a rural part of Ohio and you only are getting one ride an hour. On average, at the end of it, you're getting like $8 an hour. Not worth it, especially when you factor in all these different things, right? Which I am going to talk about later in this video. But if they're giving you a minimum hourly guarantee, it goes from you probably shouldn't drive to now you definitely should drive because you could be getting minimum, like say $18 an hour. Who cares? Like say if you never hit that, you're going to get $18 an hour. And that's the kind of low end. Let's say you have a big hour where you get a big tip or the delivery's just hitting and maybe there's like a surge or whatever. And let's say you make 25 in that hour, you keep 25, right? So the minimum hourly guarantee is kind of the lowest amount you're going to make. And this is something that I can see becoming a lot more frequent. There's a lot more talk going on right now. And remember, rideshare driving and delivery driving, I think, are very, very interconnected. And one thing happens with one kind of field, the same thing happens with another field. And we'll say as a quick side note, typically, let's say if you do sign up for Uber, it automatically signs you up for Uber Eats. So like for me, for example, I could easily go out and drive for Uber and then go on the app and switch it up and immediately go out for Uber Eats. So Uber kind of does that and puts it all together, right? Of course, when it comes to things like DoorDash, for example, it's kind of only delivery driving, right? But this kind of goes in this point that as all this kind of legislation and legal stuff, for lack of a better word, continues to happen, it is very possible that new laws start to be brought about, maybe in your area, right? That starts making the gig economy or doing gig economy type jobs a lot more feasible. This is something to look out for. And in 2024, I've never seen bigger talk about there being a minimum wage for delivery drivers and rideshare drivers and things in the gig economy, especially because Uber and Lyft did get sued. I think it was $328 million in New York and everything. And as you can imagine, when something like that does happen in a major area like New York, it is showing the rest of the country like, they agreed that Uber and Lyft kind of screwed over their drivers, right? They're screwing over their employees or their independent contractors, however they word them, right? Not good. And so we're going to make something to, moving forward, make it a lot better for those working. And that can be a huge thing if that happens in your area. Number 5, transportation. I did go over this a little bit in the requirements part in part 2, but I do want to talk about this again. Remember, when it comes to you being a delivery driver, you have a few different options. You can be on foot, which, to be honest, I think, let me know, for anyone in the comments or anyone who's been a delivery driver or who's done it on foot, how did it go? I'd be very curious to see if it actually went well or not. I think, again, the only place I can think of is New York, but of course, you can deliver on foot, bicycle, motorized scooter, car. That's kind of your main choice of options you have. And in addition, if you think about it, the requirements as well, when it comes to your vehicle being a delivery driver, are a lot lower. Like I said, if you have, like, say, a 2-door vehicle, you cannot be a rideshare driver, but you can be a delivery driver. In addition, in case you didn't know, you can also rent a car to be an Uber Eats driver. This is something I'd heavily consider. I think especially for something like, although it could go better or worse, I will talk about this in a few points, but I'd consider it. The reason why is, like, say if you want to rent a car, I'd say on average you're looking at about $200 to $300 a week. Let's say $250 to give an average, or let's say $240. I don't know, to give an average. And let's say on average, I use this analogy in the Uber and Lyft video. Let's say on average you make $20 an hour as a delivery driver. Well, you're paying $240 a week for that vehicle, so you need to drive 12 hours just to break even. Anything past that is profit, but you need to drive 12 hours just to break even. It is theoretically possible you could lose money being an Uber Eats driver. So let's say if you can't drive a lot and you're like, well, I don't have a vehicle, I don't even have a bicycle, or bicycle's not feasible in my area, I don't even know how to get a motorized scooter. I feel like that's a very unique one, right? I'm gonna rent a vehicle. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should consider just doing something else altogether. Because if, like, say you can only drive, and make this up, 20 hours a week, here's where the math gets very interesting. Let's say you drive on average 20 hours a week, and you make $20 an hour. You think, all right, well, not too bad. I'm making, $400 a week. But you're not really. Because $240 of that goes, like, say, to Uber for you renting the car through them to drive for Uber Eats. Now you're really only making $160 for that entire week, right? And if you do the math out, that means you're actually only making $8 an hour because some of that money has to go to Uber Eats to pay for the rental. So as opposed to making $20 an hour at first, it seems like you're making $20 an hour. It seems enticing. when you do all the math out, you're really only putting in your pocket $8 an hour because some of that money has to go for the rental vehicle. This is something to consider. I do know when it comes to renting a vehicle and everything, it is way more popular for Uber and Lyft. And in my opinion, I might be wrong, but just doing some meta-analysis, I do think it's a little more worth it to rent a vehicle to drive for Uber and Lyft. When it comes to Uber Eats, I just think because the low barrier to entry, the even smaller barrier to entry when it comes to the requirements in terms of your vehicle and everything, I would look at as many options as you can, right? Like, this is a big thing I want to say just in general, that renting a car could really be maybe not the best. And I know some people, don't get me wrong, rent a car and they're like, I love it. They're like, I can put as many miles as I want on my car. This is something to consider, because remember, when, like, say you go to resell your car or whatever, or in general, the more that you drive for Uber Eats, the more money you're going to have to spend in terms of gas expenses, et cetera, and there's a lot more wear and tear on your vehicle, right? So this is something to consider when it comes to your transportation. And then in general, let's say if you don't have anything, but you're watching this video and you want to start working, and you're like, I don't know what to do, I think renting might be your best option, unless you do have a bicycle or something like that. And remember too, you could always rent a vehicle, maybe save up money to get a bicycle, go to a bicycle, do a bunch of deliveries with the bicycle, and then maybe work your way up to a motorized scooter, right? So you can kind of mix and match how you want. But this is something you do have to consider, because I will say that you do have a lot more flexibility when it comes to your transportation when being a delivery driver. Number 6, your location. I know I say this every year. I've done these yearly videos like, should you be an Uber driver and a Lyft driver in 2021 and then 2022 and blah, blah, blah. This is my first one talking about delivery driving. But again, super, super important. In case you didn't know, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a delivery driver. In some areas, given, like I said before, if there's a minimum hourly guarantee, given the requirements, given the legislation, just given the overall analytics and math and accounting of how much you're getting per ride and all these other metrics. And if one driver, like say driver A and driver B, if one driver is, like, say, in a really bad area and driver A is in a really good area, even if they drive with the same vehicle and they're doing the same orders and they're driving at the same time, one delivery driver, let's say driver A, will make more money than, let's say, delivery driver B, just because they're in a better area. It is very unfortunate, but this is something to keep in mind. And this is why I suggest to a lot of people, test out the waters. Don't jump in full time. I don't suggest doing that at all, because, again, you never know. You could jump in full time and maybe you do love it. And there are some people I know who do delivery driving full time and they love it. They're like, hey, I don't have to deal with people. I have my headphones in the whole time. I'm listening to podcasts. I pick up the order. I bring it to people's houses. I can have my friend with me in the car. There are some advantages, of course. But I do suggest doing it part-time, because you never know. You could maybe drive, and given your area, given your location, you're like, it's not worth it whatsoever. Your location has a massive impact. I did a video, this is like a year, 2 years ago, but to sum it up, there's a huge meta-analysis where they looked at all these different things of analytics for each major city in the United States. And what they found was that in some cities, Uber, I'm making this up, Uber paid more than Uber Eats, but then Uber Eats paid more than Lyft, but then Lyft paid more than DoorDash, for example. In other places, DoorDash paid the most, then Uber Eats, then Lyft, then Uber, right? It was interesting that when you look at these powerhouses of the gig economy, Uber, Lyft, Uber Eats, I guess the same thing as Uber, but Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, et cetera, that just given upon the city's nature, the layout, all these different metrics like I'm talking about, in some cases, you're better off being a rideshare driver. And I know, I have brought this up a lot. I'm not trying to make this video should you be a rideshare driver or delivery driver video. That could be definitely a whole other video, for the future. But this is something to consider, because in addition to, even with the same app, and I suggest getting as many apps as you can, or excuse me, in the same industry like delivery driving, it could be a huge difference. In your area, when it comes to your location, being a DoorDash driver could actually pay more than being an Uber Eats driver. Or being a Grubhub driver could pay more than all the above, right? So make sure you download as many apps as you can. I do suggest this. I think this is very, very important to do so, because you never know. On some weekends, like say DoorDash could be paying more. On another weekend, Uber Eats could be paying more. And this is very dependent upon your location. Number 7, the timing. This is a big one, because as we all know, When it comes to restaurants, most of them, besides like McDonald's, are typically not open 24/7. There is, compared to, let's say, rideshare driving, I find when it comes to delivery driving, more of a finite window. And what I'm talking about is I know some rideshare drivers, for example, who wake up at 4 a.m. and go and drive from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. I've heard of other rideshare drivers, who start at 10 a.m. and get it done at 4 p.m. And then I know other rideshare drivers who start at 4 p.m. and get done at 10 p.m. And then there are other rideshare drivers, who go from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., right? You could pretty much always get an Uber and Lyft because you have the airport rides, you have people coming back from the bar or the nightclub, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to delivery driving, it's definitely more of a finite window. And when doing a lot of analysis, talking to delivery drivers as well, reading a lot of reports, they have found that typically the lunch hour, so let's say like 10:30 to 1:30 or 2, let's just give a bigger window, let's say 10 to 2, is actually the peak time to drive for Uber Eats. This is something to keep in mind. Uber Eats, DoorDash, etc., all the delivery driving apps. This is something just to consider when it comes to the timing, because let's say you're like, all right, I have a 9-to-5 job. I can't do the deliveries during the day. I suggest looking at Friday and Saturday nights, right? As you can imagine, people are inebriated. They're coming back from the bar or nightclub. They just want to get some drunk food, right? So I look into those type of rides. But let's say you're like, oh, I can only really do, I'm making this up, Wednesday from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. You might get some deliveries, but you also might not, right? And like I said, bringing it back to the point of the necessary issue, with it being not super, super, super necessary, if you can't really do delivery driving in, let's say, a solid hour, you might not get that much money. Now, granted, there's all these different factors to consider. If, let's say, you're getting a minimum hourly guarantee, well, you could drive whenever you want. But for 2024, although I think it is something to keep on your radar, the whole idea of having a minimum hourly guarantee, I do think we're still a little bit of a ways away from that being, like, say, a federal thing. Maybe even 5 years away or even 10 years away from that being an actual possibility. But again, there are all these different things to consider. And over when it comes to the timing, like I said, typically your peak hours, the times that you can make the most amount of money, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., let's just say that big window, probably a little bit shorter than that. Let's give it like a bigger window. And then Friday and Saturday nights are good times. And I'd say sometimes Saturday and Sunday mornings. But again, it all depends. In addition, in your area, it might depend. In the place like Vegas, for example, I know it's a lot easier to get food pretty much any time. In New York, if anything, New York probably more than any other area, 24/7 is a lot more common than, let's say, take a place like here in LA. You think Los Angeles, as a side note, like, I don't say the worst food of any city I've ever been to, but like for major cities, when you think of food, I don't know why. I've had some people be like, oh, LA. Not really. Like, yeah, you have a couple of like big celebrity, wicked expensive spots. LA's not that good for food. And two, you think like, oh, LA, like things are 24/7 here, or like things are, no. At 2 a.m., things are pretty much done. Even on like a Friday night, if I pull up Uber Eats, like say 2 or 2:30, I'm like, okay, I have McDonald's, Jack in the Box, and like Denny's to choose from. Like maybe a couple other spots, but that's it. In New York, there's like hundreds, or maybe not hundreds, but a ton of places, right? So as you can imagine, your location does have another impact on this. But just keep in mind, when it comes to the timing, if you really want to make that big, big money, you have to really deliver as best you can during those peak hours. And if you can't, and if you can only, let's say, deliver in the non-peak hours, again, always test the waters, you never know, but it might be worth it just to pick a different job. Number 8, the big 3. Now, I've talked a lot about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to being a delivery driver, and this is the good. I'd say there's mainly 3 big points when, let's say, looking at the negative aspects of being a delivery driver and the positive. And the big 3 is this. 1, you can make money pretty much whenever you want, in a sense. I'm talking about it in a second, but in a sense, right? It's a flexible schedule. Second is instant cash outs. And third is the low barrier to entry. So to break each one of those down, because I do want to talk about this for being a delivery driver. 1, the fact you can work anytime you want. There's not a quota. You can turn on the app with no warning, like say to Uber Eats, for example, and turn off the app with no warning to Uber Eats. If, like, say you happen to get out of work early and you feel like you still want to work and make some money, you can do Uber Eats. If, like, say on one Friday night you want to go out and not be a delivery driver, go for it. If, like, say the next Friday night you do want to go out and be a delivery driver, go for it. If, like, say one week you want to do 5 deliveries and then the next week you do 50, then you take a 2-week break and then you come back and do it. All these different things come into play that is truly the closest thing to being your own boss without being your own boss. And this is why, for better or for worse, a lot of people are considering being a delivery driver. just because it's that awesome. It is pretty great in terms of the true flexibility in a sense. There is an asterisk on that, which I'll talk about in a second. The second thing is now talking about the instant cash outs. This is actually super underrated. That let's say if I drive for Uber Eats, and let's say I go out and I make $100, I can hit a button and it's instantly in my bank account. Now take a step back. For most jobs, they pay bi-weekly. When it comes to YouTube though, for example, in case you didn't know, YouTube pays me or pays YouTube or pays the YouTubers once a month. You get paid once a month on the 21st. Kind of annoying that you paid monthly, so I do have to kind of budget, because at first I'm like, oh, this is a good amount, but then I'm like, oh, I have to budget for the entire month, right? And some jobs pay, let's say, bi-weekly or whatever. Now, when it comes to being a delivery driver, typically they'll pay you once a week. So let's say if you don't do anything, you make money, you don't touch the app or whatever, it will pay you once a week. However, let's say on Uber Eats, for example, there's an option for you to instantly cash out. And I'm not talking about a Venmo cash out. In case you don't know, when it comes to Venmo, it's like a payment service. You can send money to your friends or receive money from your friends. If let's say someone sends me $20 and I cash it out, it's going to be in my bank account in maybe 1 to 2 business days on average. Not the case with, like, say, Uber Eats. It's there instantly. So let's say I'm like, shoot, I forgot I have to pay this bill, this fine. I need to pay $100 today. I can go out, do deliveries, right? Because remember, it's a flexible thing. I can turn on the app whenever I want, turn it off whenever I want, make $100, hit a button. It's now instantly in my bank account, and boom, I can pay that bill. I can't think of any other job where I can, like, just immediately get that money in my hand. I mean, there's probably a few. I guess you can be like a street performer. I don't know. But when it comes to being like a delivery driver, it's a very easy way to quickly have that money in your account. And the third big point that I talked a lot about, let's say when it comes to requirements, is the low barrier to entry. I'd say when it comes to being a delivery driver, on average, when doing some research, which is kind of interesting, that's very similar to Uber and Lyft, for those who've seen my videos, as about $20 to $25 an hour, give or take, is the average amount for a delivery driver. I think closer to $20 an hour, right? And I remember, for me, looking at different accounting jobs, and I've, seen this kind of recently too. I went to school, 4-year university, went to college, spent a lot of time studying, homework, et cetera, and I got my degree in accounting. And as a result, I'm able to get accounting jobs. That makes sense. And what's interesting is I've seen some accounting jobs be like, you must have a bachelor's degree in accounting, you must know accounting, we pay $22 an hour. And I'm like, so I can either go to a 4-year university, get student debt, student loans, do all this kind of work and make $22 an hour, or I can just sign up for Uber Eats and make $22-ish an hour, right? It is kind of crazy when you think of it like that. And like I said before, when it comes to the requirements, they're so low, way lower than even like rideshare driving, whatever, when it comes to being an Uber Eats driver. And this is the big 3 points why it's so good. Now, I do want to talk about the fourth point, which is more of a negative. And that is this. Now, in the Uber and Lyft video, talking about should you be a driver in 2024, I called this the big 4, not the big 3. The reason why is the fourth point, and one advantage of being a Uber and Lyft driver, is you kind of have an unlimited amount of hours you can drive, right? You can pretty much drive almost 24/7, like I talked about. And if, let's say, you want to have a crazy week, you can. I've talked before. When I used to be a bartender, there were people who'd contact my boss or my manager, say, hey, I need those extra hours, I need to make more money. And my boss is like, sorry, we're all booked up. Not really the case with Uber and Lyft. With Uber Eats and being a delivery driver, it's not that they're going to cut you off per se in a sense, although there's some laws depending on your area that you can't be like driving 24 hours straight, for example. But I will say, talking about what I did before when it comes to the timing and the peak hours and the off-peak hours and everything, there is, I think, a certain window where you're like, shoot, and again, I don't know what it is, it depends upon your area. There's a lot of different factors. Maybe being a delivery driver from, let's say, 2 p.m. to 8 or 9, 2 a.m. to maybe 8 or 9 a.m. is just not feasible. So although, yeah, it's flexible, the reason why I put that asterisk on the flexibility is if you think about people ordering food, very few people are ordering food at, like, say, 5 in the morning. Yes, those kind of exist, but you're not going to make as much money as if you're doing it in the main peak hours. Now, when it comes to being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, like I said, there are some people who said, hey, Mark, I make the most amount of money driving from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. I know a lot of drivers have told me that they're like, hey, I make the most amount of money during then. I know a lot of drivers have told me other types of hours. I think there's a lot more true flexibility and a lot more hours you would make money when it comes to a rideshare driver versus a delivery driver. So that is just something to keep in mind. But even so, you cannot beat the flexibility, of course. Instant cash outs can't beat it. And the low barrier to entry, especially when you compare it, like I said, to other jobs, like, again, I'm not gonna lie, I made more money when I, like, say, drove for Lyft and Uber, for example, in Boston, than when, like, say, I did tax accounting for, I remember, like, a mom and pop firm near me. The firm paid, I think it was $17.50 an hour. Of course, I had a bachelor's degree in accounting. The second I started driving for Lyft and Uber, I was making about $25-ish an hour on average. I'm like, oh, I'm making more money, and I don't even need a degree. I don't even need, I have my own car. Yeah, I'm licensed. And granted, that is rideshare driving. That's a good analogy when it comes to rideshare driving, that you can make decent money compared to a lot of other jobs. Very, very low barrier to entry. Number 9, expenses. This is an unfortunate one. I mean, we all know high gas prices, all this kind of stuff has been an issue, especially throughout the past few years. This is something to keep in mind that I do want to bring up, because when it comes to being a delivery driver, the more money you make, the more money you're going to have to spend, right? If you think about it, in 2 different ways. One, I'd say proactively. 2 is retroactively. Now, proactively, what I mean, and let's take a very simple example. You have your own car, you're driving for Uber Eats or DoorDash, etc. When you go out and drive, you have to spend money in gas, right? You have to spend money in gas, and as a result, if, let's say, you go out and drive for 5 hours, you're going to have to spend more money in gas than if you go out and drive for just 1 hour. Yes, you're going to make more money in that 5 hours, or hopefully you do, but now you're spending more money in gas. The more that you drive, the more that you do deliveries, the more money you're going to spend proactively, right? Gas. Oil changes are going to become a lot more common. You're going to have to do maintenance on your car a lot more common, et cetera, et cetera. So that is something to keep in mind. Retroactively now, I guess maybe that's the best way to word it, is when you go to sell your vehicle, the more miles that are on that vehicle, the less it's worth. You might put wear and tear on your vehicle, you will, but you might put it on in such a way, like say if you do a lot of deliveries, then you might run your car into the ground a lot quicker, and now you have to get a whole new car, and you're trying to figure out the reselling option, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things to consider, because it is very unfortunate when it comes to being a delivery driver, that at first you're like, okay, I have to spend money on gas. I think that's pretty common for a lot of people to consider and think about when it comes to being a delivery driver or not. More money in gas. But it's very easy to overlook the, oh, shoot, well, I just drove 20,000 miles this year. I typically drive, I'm making this up, 10,000 miles in a year. I just went on 10,000 extra miles on my car. My car is worth less money now. And it's very easy to forget that when you're driving. But then when you look at your mileage and your odometer and you're like, oh my God, like my car's worth a lot less money now. Now, isn't this dramatic thing? It is tough to say. If you're doing a ton of deliveries and you're really racking up that wear and tear on those miles on your car, and let's say you want to resell it at a certain point in the future, that might kind of bite you in the butt, and something that you really don't expect. And this is why I bring up, take a place like In-N-Out. I use this example a lot, 'cause also I love In-N-Out. When it comes to In-N-Out, yes, you have to spend money in a sense to get to In-N-Out and come back home. But whether I work, like, say, 2 hours at In-N-Out or 10 hours at In-N-Out, I'm kind of spending the same money to get to and from there, right? I'm not spending any extra money because I'm working longer. When it comes to In-N-Out, in case you don't know, they pay I think it's like $20 an hour here. I know it's fast food. I know some people are like, oh, I'm not going to be a fast food worker. But hey, it's like $20 an hour. You get free food too, right? Can't beat that. And I love In-N-Out, right? $20 an hour. And it's one of the only places that you get benefits if you work there part-time. I think it's after like 90 days, you get like health benefits or whatever. That's pretty awesome. That's great, right? So these are all different things to consider, especially when it comes to being a driver. I don't know, that although, yes, you can make a good amount of money, and don't get me wrong, I think that depending on your area, it can be very, very worth it, like especially now in New York, even more worth it than ever before. But keep in mind, the more money that you make, the more money you do have to spend, when other jobs, typically it does depend, but typically that's not really the case. Which leads me into number 10, and that is better alternatives. What I'm talking about here is when a lot of people ask me like about being a delivery driver or rideshare driver, I always say, okay, but why? I know it sounds like a weird question, but why? And a lot of people say, well, I need the flexible schedule. I need to make more money. I need a secondary job. I need this, I need that. I don't have a college degree, and I know it's easy to be an Uber Eats driver or whatever the case is. But I'd always ask yourself, what is it's going to sound a bit philosophical, what are the foundational reasons, the foundational aspects of you wanting to be a delivery driver? Is it the flexible schedule? Is it that you're location independent? I know some people have contacted me saying, hey, Mark, I like being a ride driver, for example, or a delivery driver, because I can, like, say, work in Miami, and then, like, say, if I want to move to New Orleans, for example, I can easily move to New Orleans, move my location on Uber Eats, and I can continue driving. It's location independent. I can kind of work wherever. And I'd always like to ask these people, like, well, is there any way you can get the benefits that you want out of being a delivery driver in a different job? For example, let's say you're like, I'm making this up, let's say you're like, I need something that pays about 20-ish an hour, and I can work on a Friday from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Was opposed to being an Uber Eats driver, you might make more money at the end of the day being an In-N-Out burger worker, right? Working at In-N-Out. Just use that as an example. Let's say, for example, you're like, well, I want to spend more time with my family. I do know a lot of people have said to me that Uber, Lyft, Uber Eats, DoorDash, etc., one of the benefits of being a ride driver and a delivery driver that they've really loved is, like, so they can go to their daughter's dance recital at 2 p.m. at the school. They can go to their son's soccer game at this specific time, right? They don't have to worry as much when it comes to the flexible nature of it, right? And I get that. Or you could get, like, say, a remote job, and there's a bajillion remote jobs now, especially post-pandemic. You know, there's so many remote jobs out there, and it's very easy to find them on Monster, Indeed, LinkedIn. Maybe we'll do some videos about this. There's even sites that are dedicated just for remote jobs, that every job that's on that site is purely remote. You get a remote job that maybe has a thing where they say, hey, we have a flexible schedule. As long as you get your work done, and there are jobs like this, as long as you get your work done, do it on your own time. And if you're like, hey, now I have a remote job, so I have a flexible schedule, which means I can work, let's say, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., go to my daughter's dance recital at 2 p.m., I get back at 5 p.m., I then work for a few more hours, boom, I get my work done, I can easily do that, right? Or, let's say, to use that remote example again, if, let's say, you love traveling, I personally think you're going to have a way easier time getting a remote job just purely online, doing, like, I don't know, data entry or something, that truly allows you to travel. Again, these are all things to consider. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some cases I know for some people who say, hey, I make way more money doing Uber Eats or DoorDash, and being an Uber Eats driver, DoorDash driver, Grubhub driver, etc., I make way more money doing that than me trying to find other remote jobs, just given the nature of my city, whatever. And that could have to be the case. But in other cases, I think that, yes, well, Uber Eats does have a low barrier to entry. And yes, for, let's say, other jobs, you might have to interview. You might have to do more stuff to kind of sign up with that job. You might be better off in the long run looking at better alternatives than being a delivery driver. And now, a bonus point, and that is other delivery types. Now, kind of making things full circle, in the beginning, I talked about what type of delivery driver. Should you be, for example, a driver for Uber Eats and DoorDash, or your local pizza spot? But there's another type of delivery driving, and that's driving for companies like Amazon, Walmart, etc. I gotta be honest that when it comes to this, I've heard a lot of stories, right? You've probably seen all these crazy stories about people working in the Amazon warehouse. I've seen horror stories about people delivering for Amazon, of them having to, like, urinate in bottles because the deliveries were so cutthroat that they didn't even have time to stop and go to the bathroom. So I have seen horror stories, and I like to be very transparent on my videos. At the same time, I have had people comment on my channel saying, hey, Mark, I was doing Uber, I was doing Lyft, I was doing Uber Eats, I was doing DoorDash. I started driving for Amazon. I'm making way more money. I drive the vehicle, so I don't put the wear and tear on my own vehicle. Things are a lot better driving for Amazon, and I'm making way more money. I've had people tell me that when it comes to being a Walmart driver, or even as a kind of a unique one, which I know might be too left field for this video, but I do want to mention it, being, like, say, a FedEx driver or UPS driver. One of my friends I remember drove for UPS. He made wicked good money. I think it was something like 60-something K a year, between 60 and 70K a year, which is more than he made as an accountant, being a UPS driver. And I know, for this video, you're like, Mark, I'm talking about Uber Eats. I want to do this as a flexible schedule for Friday nights. So I do know that this is maybe more of, like, a left field thing. I think when most people think of being a delivery driver, UPS doesn't come to mind. It's almost like a different type of delivery. That's the right way to word it. But that is something to consider. Like, you can make a good amount of money being a UPS driver and a FedEx driver, And like I said, you typically drive your own vehicles. There's a lot of advantages to doing it, and there's a lot more protection. You typically might get benefits, all this kind of stuff. So when it comes to being a delivery driver, if like say you're looking to get into it full time, maybe going full time into UPS or FedEx or other ones can be a lot better. I do suggest looking into like say things like Amazon, Walmart, like all these different kind of options you may have. It is something that I will say does depend, like I said numerous times in this video, I know, city to city and state to state, and maybe just given your situation. If let's say you're like, all right, I don't have any work, I'm between jobs or I'm unemployed, I need something, and I think Uber Eats is maybe a good thing to start, I suggest maybe UPS. I'm just making them up, right? This is not sponsored by UPS. But let's say if you're like, all right, well, I want something flexible, maybe being an Amazon delivery driver might actually pay more money for you, might be easier and way less expenses. Again, it depends. I can't say exactly because it depends on a lot of different factors, but that might be better than you, let's say, being an Uber Eats driver. Or maybe at the end of the day, none of this is good, and we bring it all the way back to point one, like I was saying before, and you do kind of what my friend did in college. Like, you know what? I'm just going to drive for the local pizza spot. I mean, I feel like most of those use Uber Eats now anyway, but maybe there's a local spot in your town that you're like, you know what? This pays the most and has everything I want.